Everybody, please be sure to subscribe. Subscribe so we know when we drop new videos, new podcasts, and also please like the videos and share them. Share them. Tell your friends about them. Spread this great message that we at the Zucker are spreading. So subscribe, like, and share. It really helps. Thank you. Hey, what's up? Good afternoon, family. Hello, hello, hello. And welcome to the Johnny and Clyde, Cousin Jonathan and the Rocketman Big Book Study. Now, we're just two alcoholics reading and studying and discussing the big book together the way that Joe and Charlie did back in the day. So let's start with a moment of silence to reflect on why we are here, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We'd like to have someone, Clyde, can you come in and read the set aside prayer?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, cousin. Thank you. So, God, today, help us set aside everything we think we know about you, everything we think we know about ourselves, everything we think we know about others, and everything we think we know about our own recovery so that we may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please show us the truth.
All right, thank you so much. That's what we need today. So, in 1973, Joe McHugh introduced Charlie P. as an AA speaker in the Al Anon convention. Joe and Charlie soon discovered that they both shared a love for the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they started traveling between their homes and discussing and studying the Big Book together, and it became a regular event. Now, Johnny and Clyde, me and Clyde, we met here in the Zoo Crew in early 2022 and also discovered that we had a love for the Big Book and we loved reading it and studying it together. So someone asked us if we would do this podcast. And so here we are today. We meet every Sunday at 2 p.m. until 3:30 Eastern time in this room. We ask that you please have your big book handy so that you can read along and take notes and even underline and make highlights as we all study together. We will be recording this audio of these meetings to share them with others. You can go to our podcast at thezoocrew.org on our website. So the purpose of this big book study is to help us when we're meeting with a prospect or what we might call a sponsee or just talking about sobriety in general. You see, we want you to be armed with the facts about yourself in the AA program because freedom from alcohol comes through taking the 12 steps and working with others. Now, page 15 of our 12 and 12 tells us exactly what the 12 steps are. AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable a sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. How soon do you want to be happy, joyous, and free? We suggest that you purchase a copy of the Big Book for future use if you don't have one. You might want to underline, highlight, and even take notes as we study together. Now, please order your AA literature directly from AA so that the money goes to Alcoholics Anonymous and to ensure that you actually get the right copy. Here in the original Zuku, we are not advocating that you rush through the steps. We highly suggest that you have a sense of urgency in taking the 12 steps and having them become a way of life sooner than later. Listen, act as if this was a matter of life and death, because it actually is a matter of life and death. Once again, how soon do you want to be happy, joyous, and free? You can go to our website at thezucrew.org and order a copy of the Big Book as well as read it online. Now, the Big Book is our basic text and it contains a full recipe for recovery. It's impossible to find a loophole in the Big Book that excludes you from being a member of AA. So we want to welcome you to the podcast. So far in this podcast, we have covered all 12 steps in the Big Book. Over the next week or two, we will be we will be reviewing what we have read and studied together and being ready and getting ready to move on to the next set of hosts that we'll be hosting from 2 until 3:30. Next week will be the last time that we will be hosting the Big Book study during this segment. So we want to thank you all for being here with us over these last few months that we've studied this book together. And get prepared for the next two hosts that will be stepping up. That will be Sunday the 16th. The new host will be Lindsay and Alyssa, and they will be taking you through the Big Book, the first 164 pages, one weekend at a time. So this has certainly been a pleasure. Come on in, Clyde.
Okay, thank you, cousin. Hi, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Clyde. And we're going to summarize now the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and what we've studied so far in the book. And we're going to start, if you have your book handy, we're going to start at the front here. And so today's not interactive. Cousin Jonathan and I are going to summarize what we've learned and kind of hit the highlights of each chapter and each part of the book that we've studied. So we're going to start right at the front of the book. Where
now, today, Clyde, just 1 second. Today, Clyde, today
yes.
is definitely a day that we should get a sheet of paper out and take these pages down that you're going to be going through with us.
Yes, good idea. And have your book handy with a pen and a highlighter to catch these highlight paragraphs and statements and instructions so you can underline and highlight. Good advice, cousin. Thank you. So we're going to start in the contents on Roman numeral V. And the first thing we wanted to point out is just the way the book's laid out. And you'll see there's a preface and then 4 forewords. And that's general information like the history, the beginning of AA, that kind of stuff. And then it moves into these chapters, and it includes the doctor's opinion too. Then it goes into chapters 1 through 11, which is the first 164 pages of the book. That's the second part. Then the third part is the personal stories in the back of the book. And then finally, there's the appendices. So there's 4 parts. And this book, it's a textbook, and it's meant to be done in order. And so the order is, well, let's back up. What is the main purpose of this book? If we read the foreword to the first edition on page XII, Roman numeral 13, it says, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So that's why we have this book, to show us how to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So that's the main purpose of the book. And the way it's laid out, we have that general information in the preface and the forewords, and then the doctor's opinion, chapter 1, Bill's story, and chapter 2, there is a solution, and chapter 3, more about alcoholism. That is all step 1. That is step 1. Then we agnostics, chapter 4 is step 2. Steps 3 and 4 are outlined in chapter 5, how it works. And then chapter 6 into action is steps 5 through 11 are all covered in there. And then finally, the step 12 is chapter 7, working with others. So that's the way the 12 steps are laid out in this book. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a summary of the doctor's opinion. And the first thing we want to note is on page XXVI, that's Roman numeral 26, Dr. Silkworth had this amazing revelation that and experienced witnessing that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. And we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. This was pioneering new information at the time that had never occurred to anybody prior to Dr. Silkworth making this discovery. He saw it in all these alcoholic patients that he was treating. He could tell something was going on with us. So he's the one that came up with this physical aspect of alcoholism. Prior to that, it was all, moral and mental. Okay. And then at the bottom of page XXVII tells us there's a power that can pull us chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. So he's letting us know that we're going to need a higher power here. And if you turn the page to page XXVIII, this is going to tell us why we drink. This has to do with, he's going to explain exactly what's going on with us alcoholics. So up above, it tells us that, we have this habit, we can't break it. And so we've lost our self-confidence, our reliance on things human, and our problems pile up on us and become astonishingly difficult to solve. So we have these problems piling up on us. Then at the bottom of the page, he says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol, because this helps us cope with all these problems that are so difficult. And he says, we're restless, irritable, and discontent. And then we can experience some ease and comfort at once by taking a few drinks. And that's where this physical thing kicks in, the phenomenon of craving, he calls it. So we become so frustrated and our problems are piling up on us. We're getting restless, irritable, and discontent. We take a drink to get some relief from all that. And then this phenomenon of craving, this physical allergy kicks in. And once that kicks in, we cannot stop. We crave more and more and more. So that's what sets it in motion. And so that's what makes us alcoholic. Then he tells us in the second paragraph, first complete paragraph on XXIX, that a psychic change is what we need to recover. And it's lower on the page says something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. So that's what a spiritual awakening is, a psychic change. Psychic means your mind. So our mind needs to be changed. And the way to do that is something more than human power. We can't do it. We need a higher power to do that. So that's the summary of the front of the book there. And then we move into chapter 1, which is Bill's story. And Bill talks about, he has 16 pages here. The first 8 pages is his alcoholism and the way it affected him and his downward spiral. And then the next 8 pages are his recovery, which are remarkable and amazing. And at this point, I'm going to pass things off to my partner and dear friend, Cousin Jonathan, and he's going to run with a summary on Bill's story for us. Cousin?
Okay, so here we are at Bill's story. And in Bill's story, he tells us about his background, about his upbringing, and about his going into the service and coming out and being ready to just take the world by storm. That's what the beginning of his story is about. But it didn't work out that way. And in the end, by the time you get to page 7, this is the kind of condition that he was in. He says, my brother-in-law, physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, by the way, that's the only time Bill mentions his mother in his whole story, page 7. So that tells you how serious this is. His mother came all the way from Vermont down to New York to help him. So it says that he was placed in a nationally known hospital for mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics under the so-called belladonna treatment. The belladonna treatment was a form of poison, nightshade. They believed that if you cleaned an alcoholic out, that he wouldn't drink again. So they would give you this nightshade. They had to administer it to you very carefully. And what it would do is, well, you'd have something coming out of every hole in your body. And by the time you took this stuff, yeah, you wouldn't have any more alcohol in you. And that would be what the equivalent of what they have that stuff today for drug addicts, Noxicol or whatever that's called. What's that called? Noxacan, where it just blows all of the poisons and impurities and stuff like that out of you. And boy, did that stuff hurt, from what I understand. And it could have side effects that could kill you. So they were really guinea pigging alcoholics back then. And it says that the belladonna treatment and that cleared his brain, and then he would go through these hydrotherapy also, and mild exercise. That's to try and get your strength back up. But it says, best of all, I met a kind doctor. That is Dr. Silkworth, who Clyde was just talking about, who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating alcohol. So that was actually the beginning of Bill learning anything about his condition on page 7. His brother-in-law came to help him. They sent him, and they happened to drop him at Towns Hospital, where Dr. Silkworth was there working. And Dr. Silkworth told him the nature of his condition. So from there, we will move right on, because that definitely was not enough to stop Bill. So he went on, and by the time we get to the middle of page 8, where it says no words, right? He goes back out after coming out of this high-powered hospital, goes back out and start drinking for a while. And after a while, this is what he says. No words could tell of the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. This was the beginning of his step 1 experience, only the beginning of his step 1 experience. So from there, this wasn't enough neither, because he says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me up a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of the first drink. And on Amethyst Day, which is today our Veterans Day, 1934, I was off again. Now, that was near the end of November, when he had finally sat back down and was in the house drinking. And we know that his friend, Ebby, came by to see him. And of course, they tell the story of how Ebby came by and told him that he had gotten sober. And Bill agreed, looking across the table. He said that this guy was changed. And when he asked him how, Ebby simply told him, I found religion. And Bill, he scoffed at that. He didn't think that religion would help him. And so it says the door opened, and there he stood, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. So he asked what had happened. Now, Bill pushed the drink across the table, and he refused it. And disappointed but curious, he says, I wondered what had gotten into this fellow. He wasn't himself. So at this point, Ebby is offering him the program of recovery. And he's there, and he's not quite knowing what's going on. So let's move right on to where Bill actually takes the steps, how simple it can be. So he goes on and says that during the course of his visit, he said he did no ranting. In a matter of fact way, he told me how two men had appeared in court and persuaded the judge to suspend the commitment. He had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. Today, we would say a simple spiritual idea and a practical program of action. That is what we are doing here. And it says that that was 2 months ago, and the results were self-evidence. You know why? Because it obviously was working. So Bill had admitted that he had lost. He said that quicksand was all around him and that alcohol became his master. By this time, Ebby was telling him about the religious angle of the program. So Bill had replied, I had always believed in God, page 10, the middle, in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. He admits he was not an atheist. So from there, we will move right on to page 11. And this is where the steps come to life right here. Page 11, take a note. Said, but my friend sat across from me. My friend sat before me, and he had made a point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Now listen, like myself, he admitted complete defeat. Step one. Like myself, he admitted complete defeat. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. We. Like myself, he, that equals we, admitted we were powerless over alcohol. That had in effect been that he had infected and he had in fact, excuse me, then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of living better than the best he had ever known. So he asked himself, had this power originated in him? That's a question. And he answers it. Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that moment. We're both powerless. Again, the same thing in different words. We're both powerless. Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And that was none at all. Bill admits that floored him. And he had what they would call a new outlook on things. And he says, it begins to look as though these religious people are right after all. Here is something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. There sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table, and he shouted good tidings. So that is his first step. That is his first step experience. And that's where the we even came into play. So now Ebby is asking him about this religious thing. And he goes on to say that it may be working for you, but it's not working for me. And I don't think that I want to actually go that route with you. And this is where Ebby corners him and gives him no way out, right in the middle of page 12. It says that my friend suggested what seemed to be a novel idea. And so Ebby told him, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Wow. And Bill admits that statement hit me hard. It melted away the intellectual mountain whose shadow I had lived and shivered for many years. That surely did break apart Mr. Smarty Pants, like I call it. Mr. Smarty Pants. It says that that statement hit me hard and melted away the intellectual, Mr. Smarty Pants, mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered for years. It made him actually stand in the sunlight at last. It says, Bill had realized that it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make a beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Question, would I have it? Answer, of course I would. That is the second step right there. So we're going to move on. And the bottom line is, even after Bill took his first and his second step, he wasn't done drinking. He went back out and drank. And here is where we see what we call a spiritual awakening. And later on page 14, we're going to see Bill's spiritual experience. So it says, thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At last I saw, I felt, I believed, came to believe in a power greater than myself. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience at the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon, the sense of his presence was blotted out by worldly calamities, mostly those within myself. Bill immediately went on a pink cloud after step 2. That was pink cloud syndrome. And so it had been ever since. So he realizes how blind I had been. So after this run, he makes it back to the hospital. He's back in the hospital now. Remember, he had been through the belladonna treatment and the hydrotherapy through the family. So now he's back in the hospital. And now he's ready to do the work. He says, at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremors. Step 3. There, I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself, I was nothing. That without him, I was lost. Step 4, I ruthlessly faced my sins or character defects and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. Step 4, 6, and 7. Next paragraph, you'll see step 5. And have not had a drink since he did the work. Steps 3, 4, 6, and 7. Here's step 5. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies, admitted to God, to myself, and to another human being, the exact nature of my wrongs. We made a list of people that we had hurt and to whom I had felt resentment. Made a list. Step 8. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Here's the instructions for doing that. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. So, Bill, I went through the first 8 steps while in the hospital, between being in the hospital and making it to the hospital. We know that he did his 5th step, and we know that the 9th step was to come. He had the instructions to do a 9th step. When he was released from the hospital, he went out and started doing that. So, step 10, I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within me. Continue to take personal inventory. Common sense would become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking for direction and strength to meet my problems. Step 11, prayer and meditation, as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself except except as my request bore on the usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. Okay, here are the instructions that Ebby gave him, that if he did these first 11 steps, this would be his 12-step instructions. He says that my friend promised that when these things were done, I would enter into a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all of my problems. What I would need is belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility. Watch this word here. To establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements, not suggestions. Let's go back. Willingness, honesty, and humility would be the essential requirements. Requirements are not suggestions. It is not a suggestion that you bring your passport to get on an airplane. It is a requirement. So, what Bill had realized is what we say today is that this program is simple but not easy. And it's definitely not free, because a price is going to have to be paid. And the price is the destruction of self-centeredness. I'm going to have to learn how to turn all things over to my higher power, the Father of light, who presides over all of us anyway, whether I like it or not. And he goes on to let us know that these were revolutionary and drastic proposals. Here's his white light experience. But he says, the moment I fully accepted them, the moment we fully accept the program and become what? Willing, honest, and humble, this is what could happen, and this is what happened to him. He says, when I fully accepted these things, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up. Wow. I felt lifted up as though a great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. Then he explains, that was his experience. Let's read that again. The effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, freedom, followed by such a peace and serenity. That's what we're looking for. As I had never known before. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though a great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. Then he lets us know that God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was, circle this, sudden and profound. For a moment, I was alarmed, and I called my friend, the doctor. That was Dr. Silkworth, to ask him if I was still sane. And he listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, something has happened to you. I don't understand it. But you had better hang on to it, because anything is better than the way you were. It goes on to say that the doctor sees many men who have had such experiences, and he knows that they are real. Here's the magic, and here's why we're here today. Because Bill says, while I lay in the hospital bed, the thought came to me that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what has been so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them, and they in turn could work with others. Wow. Clyde, give us step 12.
Yeah, sure, cousin. Thank you for the opportunity here. Yeah, so step 12, Bill is talking about it over and over here. You know, he had this thought that he needed to help other people and that they in turn would work with others. So the step 12, he hits on it several times here at the bottom of page 14, says, my friend emphasized the absolute necessity. Again, this isn't optional, it's a necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative, that means must be done, to work with others as he had worked with me. Said faith without works was dead, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. So here's, I want you to highlight and underline this. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. So if you want to perfect and enlarge your spiritual life, it's called work and self-sacrifice for others. Service, carry the message, service to others. Then Bill goes on in the next paragraph more about this 12-step work. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. So Bill and Lois are on their way to help others. And then it's a good thing too, he tells us, because his old business associates, even though he'd been sober, they were skeptical. They were like, yeah, we don't trust you. We don't believe you. You burned us so many times. And he said that his old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, 18 months. So Bill wasn't able to get work and earn money, and he wasn't doing too well at the time. It says he was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment, starting to really get down and out. And it sometimes drove him back to drink. He came close to having a drink as a result of that. But he soon found, here's the magic, when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I've gone to my old hospital in despair. Talking to a man there, I'd be amazingly lifted up, set on my feet. That's what works. We get out of ourselves and into service, helping others. It's a design for living that works in rough going. So that's the key. Service, carry the message, work with other alcoholics. That's the best way to stay sober. Best way for you to stay sober and carry the message and help other people. So that's
And
it.
by the way, all of this happened between Amethyst Day, which is the second week in December, and Bill got sober in December the 11th. So all of this happened in just a couple of weeks. We can recover very quickly in this program if we follow the simple directions that have been given to us, and that's all that he did.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to the next chapter, and Clyde is going to give us the review on that, which is There is a Solution.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, cousin, for the great breakdown on Bill's story. It really is quite amazing the way he wrote that, and it all ties together, and he explains the whole program so perfectly and concisely in there. Love it. Thank you for outlining that for us, cousin. So we move on now to chapter 2. There is a solution. In case you're wondering what the solution is, they're going to tell us. So first off, on page 17, the bottom paragraph tells us the tremendous fact for every one of us is that we've discovered a common solution. So there is a solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. So the brotherly and harmonious action is the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the group. And then the other part of the solution is recovery, taking the 12 steps and having the spiritual experience or spiritual awakenings. So it's two parts to, there's the fellowship And then there's also the fellowship in the group, and then there's also the 12 steps. So I'm going to jump over now to page 20. And it says, doubtless, at the top of the page here, the first complete paragraph, it says, you're curious how and why. Doubtless, you're curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. And it says, if I want to get over it, it says, what do I have to do? So that's the question. And then here it is again. It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. So that's why they wrote the book, to tell us how to get over. What do we have to do? They're going to tell us. So on page 25, we're going to learn about the solution. It says there is a solution, that top paragraph. And it says, almost none of us liked the self-searching. That's the 4-step inventory. The leveling of our pride. That's our 5th step. And going out and making our amends. The confession of shortcomings. So that's making our amends. That's doing our 5th step. So this is steps 4, 5, and 9 that he's referring to here that are particularly troublesome for a lot of us. But the process requires that for its successful consummation. It means for it to work, to be complete. But we saw that it really worked in others. So we have to, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. So we realized that it works for other people. And so he says, when therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. So those tools are laid out for us. It's called the Big Book and the 12 Steps and the Fellowship. We found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a 4th dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. And that 4th dimension is beyond the physical. It's the peace of mind. It's our personality. It's the way we think. It's the way we feel. It's the way we behave. It's ideas, attitudes, and emotions. As a matter of fact, let's turn to page 27 and explain, what this means. To be rocketed into the 4th dimension, here's what it is. It's emotional displacement and rearrangement. I'm in the middle of page 27. It says ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. We're shifting into that 4th dimension, that spiritual dimension. We're getting away from the materialistic, physical, all that kind of stuff, and into the spiritual realm. And that's where the peace and the serenity comes in. And it says, there's a couple that's a description of a spiritual awakening there. Here's another. The great fact is just this. I'm on page 25. Great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. So this is the solution. And the way to have that solution is to take these 12 steps and develop that relationship with that higher power that's going to do this for you. And it tells us down below, bottom paragraph, page 25, that there's no return through human aid. We're beyond human aid. We need a higher power to do this. We have 2 alternatives. We can either keep on drinking and just to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation, And that's where we have the efforts and just keep drinking and killing ourselves. That's one choice. And then the other choice is to accept spiritual help and get well. So there's no in between, there's no middle ground. You choose one or the other. And also want to point out that in this chapter, he tells us this is where the concept begins. He's going to explain further in subsequent chapters that on page 26, he says that this guy, this is Roland Hazard, the first guy that got sober under Dr. Jung's treatment using the Oxford group, program to have a spiritual experience and get sober. He said that this guy, Roland, thought that he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. So he thought, oh, now I know what's going on with me. I understand what an alcoholic is. And so he understood his thinking process under Dr. Jung's care. And he thought, okay, I got it figured out. Now I can solve the problem. He was drunk in a short time. Self-knowledge does not work. So that's pretty much the extent of the solution. It's a spiritual experience that is the solution. And we take the steps to do that. And the fellowship is an excellent support system that goes with it, the group and the fellowship. So that's a pretty good summary, I think, of what this vital spiritual experience is all about. That's what recovery is. That is the solution. Okay. So then, Cuzin, on chapter 3, more about alcoholism.
That's where we're going to. That's where we're going to find some of the instructions, where the instructions actually begin, because the last thing that they say in There Is a Solution, it says, further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recover. Now just turn the page. Now just turn the page and look right at the middle of this page 30. Further on, we are going to give you clear-cut directions on how we have recovered. So, where are those at? First off, the idea that someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of disillusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. Step one. We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. That's what the book says. As you turn from the page telling us that we're going to give you clear-cut directions, the next page, here are those directions right in the middle of the page. The first step in recovery, it says that we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. That's it. This is the first step in recovery. Fully concede means to stop once and for all thinking that we're not. Stop once and for all thinking that we're not. But then it goes on, in order to solid, or just to concrete this, if you look right over to page 32, straight across the page, and even though we have taken the first step, we have conceded to ourselves that we were alcoholics. Despite all that we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they are in this class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exception to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. If anyone is showing inability to control his drinking and can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. If you don't get it, you don't get it. That's that. Step one is it's very to the point. You know, all of that I'm on step one bullshit is bullshit. Either you've taken the first step or you haven't. Let's move on to step two. And we're going to find that in We the Agnostic. What is step two? Step two is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We believed the exact opposite of that before coming into AA. We had come to believe in the fertility of life and accepted that we lost. And we could do nothing about it on our own, but keep trying on our own. And what we found was lack of power, page 45. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how are we to find this power? It gives us the same answer that it gave us on page 29 once again. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means this book, that means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. If you think you have a moral problem, this book is going to help you. If you think you have a spiritual problem, this book is going to help you. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. We're not trying to fool you. We're not trying to come at you sideways. We're not trying to sneak anything in on you. The book tells us we're going to talk about God. And we understand that here some difficulty arises with agnostics. Tell us what an agnostic is, Clyde.
An agnostic is someone that's not convinced whether there is a God or not a God, and they just don't really, even if they acknowledge that, yeah, there's probably a God, I just, don't really care, to deal with it. I just make my own decisions and run my own life. Basically ignore God, even if you believe.
And what's the atheist?
Now, an atheist thinks there is no God. So he's definitely in charge of his own show, running the show himself, because he has nobody else to turn to and just doesn't believe, period.
So the agnostic believes that there may be a God, but he ain't done nothing for me.
Yeah.
And the atheist says, you could just close that book because I'm not with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You
We
got
need
it.
to decide which one of these that we're on the side of. But it really doesn't matter anymore, because if we really want to get sober, we're going to turn to page 47. Now, this is for the atheist or the agnostic. We need to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself? That's a question. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. On his way where? To step 3. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful, effective spiritual structure can be built. Step 2, right in the middle of page 47. This is what I would do. I need to ask this person but one short question. Do you believe, or are you willing to believe, that there is a power greater than yourself? And then it says, as soon as the man can say, if he does say that he does believe or is willing to believe, I'm supposed to assure him that he is on his way and move on to step 3. That's all it says about step 2 here. By the way, We the Agnostic is probably the most intellectual chapter in the book. This is where Bill did his best writing, in this chapter here. And you can easily get caught up and lost in it. That's why we pointed out the specific points in the chapter so that you would go right to it and understand that. I need to ask the person but one simple question. Do you believe, or are you willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? If they say yes, I assure them that he is on his way. And then we move on to step 3. That will bring us to the chapter, how it works. Now, when taking one through the steps, you would read how it works with them because you want them to know how the program works. But what I usually do is stop here where it says, here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. That was page 30. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's page 45.
47.
47 if you answered yes. And now what we're about to do is make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand it. From here, we would go right to the ABCs. Well, we would read the rest of it. We would pick back up at many of us exclaim after reading the first 2 steps and the 3rd step. And then as many of us exclaim, what in order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. And you know what? If you read all 12 of the steps to me, I would probably say the same damn thing. That's why I stop at step 3. And then we move on with the instructions for the rest of the steps. I hope that makes sense to you. It made sense to me when they did it to me like that. So many of us exclaim, what in order? We only discussed 3 steps. What are you talking about? Okay, there is some humor in it too. So we will let you know, do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter 2, the agnostic, page 45 and 47, and our personal adventures before and after, Bill's story, and more stories to come, make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Step 1, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, A. B, step 2, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, step 3, that God could and would if he was sought. Being convinced that we were at step 3, that we had decided to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him, here's the question. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? That's the question. Here's the answer. The first suggestion, that's not a suggestion, it says requirement. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I can't do this alone. On this basis, we are always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live on self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor wanting to run the whole show. That was me. That was me, to the T. So now we're going to turn right to page 62. And this is the part that I didn't like. Right in the middle of the page. I don't know why Bill put it right in the middle of the page. I guess so that he wanted to make sure that I would see it. Selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Right down to the next paragraph, it says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholics is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he doesn't think so. So our troubles are basically of our own. It's time for me to leave. I don't want to talk to you no more. You're not my friend. Who the hell do you think you are? You don't know me. These are the thoughts that went through my head when you guys read this to me. John, you've done this to yourself. I didn't want to accept or believe that. So, in order to help me to understand that, you let me know that it says right here, after that, it says, I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, though I never think so. Above everything else, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. And God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. Remember, that's what I was doing. We had to have God's help. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. Here's the beginning of instructions. First, now it's next. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, that God was going to be what? The director, the principal. We are his agents. He is the father. We are his children. You can call God whatever you need to, but you need to call him. You can call him director, principal. You can say that he is that you're his agent. You can call him father. You can call yourself his child. But you need to get this idea into your head, because most good ideas are simple, and this concept is the keystone to the new and triumphant arch we pass through to freedom. And there's only one way to do this, and it's right in the top of the page. When this is sincerely, when we sincerely took such a position. What position? To position that we're going to quit playing God. What's going to happen is all sorts of remarkable things will follow. This is the beginning of the promises. What's going to happen is we will have a new employer. He will be all powerful. He will provide what we need if we keep close to him and perform his work well. Established on such a footing, we will become less and less interested in ourselves and our little plans and designs, right, Clyde?
Yes.
By the way, this is the line that me and Clyde really clicked and met on when we were reading this together. We both had an aha moment and realized that that was us.
Yeah.
We had our own little plans and designs for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And the more and more, what happens is, these are the promise, that we will become less and less interested in our own little plans and designs and more interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered that we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his, God, higher power's presence, we begin to lose fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We will be reborn. We are now at step 3. And many of us said to our Maker, as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me, to do with me as thy will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them might bear witness to those I might help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. This is the third step prayer. This is a totally a AA prayer. It was given to us from Harold Hill. We don't know if he was an AA member or a close friend of AA, but he had gotten contact with, well, actually, he was a minister in Manhattan and a friend of AA. And he wrote this prayer, and check this out. He presented it to his congregation, and they didn't want it. So when Bill read it, he took it to Dr. Bob, and we took it and we used it. So that's how the prayer actually came about. The prayer was for a congregation, but they didn't want it. It wasn't religious enough for them. They wanted some more these, thous, and all of that kind of stuff, and it just didn't sound religious enough for them. So you know what? We took it, and it's been our own prayer ever since. The third step prayer belongs to AA. Yes, it does. It's our own thing. So it says that we thought well before taking this step, making sure that we were ready. Am I? That we could what? Wow. At last abandon ourselves utterly. Do you know that that means once and for all? At last abandon ourselves utterly. I don't have to continue to do third steps unless I'm bringing other people through it and having new experiences. But my third step is my third step if I do it sincerely. And Bill is going to capitalize on that in the bottom of this page. So what we want to do is, when ready, we want to at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. We find it desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, that is us, such as, okay, your spouse, your wife, a best friend, or a spiritual advisor, your priest. But it's better to always meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. That is not us. The wording, of course, is optional as long as you express the idea voicing without reservation. This is only a beginning, though if honestly, look back up at the top of the page, sincerely and humbly, look back up at the top of the page, sincerely, wow, made an effect, sometimes a great one, would be felt. The third step only requires that I be sincere. That's the third step in one word, sincerity. And after I do that sincerely, these remarkable things can happen. So after that, it says next, we launch out on a course of action. The first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted, though the decision that we just made in step 3 was vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect unless followed by strenuous action to face and get rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Because now, by this time, we found out that liquor was but a symptom. So we're getting ready to get down to the causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This brings us to step 4. You want to come in and take over from there, Clyde?
Yeah, I can. You can pass the ball to me, partner, cousin, and yeah, let's go ahead and read the instructions. So this is the beauty of this book, the way Bill wrote it. It just goes line by line, word by word, specific directions on what we're doing. So we've completed now the first 3 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. They're complete. Now we're going to start step 4. He's going to tell us exactly how to do it. And this is where we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. He's going to tell us what that is and how to do it. And here's the directions. That on page 64 is where it begins. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. It says this was step 4. So what Bill does first is he uses an analogy of a business, a commercial business, checking their inventory and looking for things on the shelves that are piling up and collecting dust or damaged and just taking up space. and need to be, gotten rid of and replaced with the things that are in demand, good quality products that will sell. And so the analogy is we're going to do that with the way we think, our thoughts. We want to get rid of the crummy old thoughts that are damaged, no good, and replace them with good thoughts. So we want to get rid of self-will and get, into God's will. God's will is good. So he's going to tell us how to make inventory here. So first of all, he tells us in the middle of the page, being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. So we're going to take stock honestly. We're searching out the flaws in our makeup that caused our failure, and our selfishness, that we just read about and got rid of by turning our will and our life over to God, has manifested itself in three distinct ways with us alcoholics. The first one is when we don't get what we want, when we want it, how we want it, we get mad and we get resentful and angry. So he's going to tell us about that. It says resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And Bill refers to this as a spiritual malady. He said, not only are we mentally and physically ill as alcoholics, we have this spiritual malady. So we're spiritually ill too. And he tells us that once we overcome this spiritual illness, then we'll straighten out physically and mentally. So that's the purpose of doing this. So here's where the process gets really specific. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper, okay? So this is part of the reason the steps work so well and are so effective, because we're going to write it down. Prior to this, these thoughts have been just rolling around in our heads and they come and go and nothing ever happens. We're going to write them down. We're going to set them on paper. And he tells us to list the people, the institutions, or the principles who we're mad at. So you want to think about, who are you walking around thinking about all the time, day after day, week after week, month after month, that SOB, or, it could be politics, it could be the organized religion or the police, or it could be your wife or your husband or your kids or your parents or whoever you're mad at. You're going to write them down. And he shows us a format over here too. But before you do that, you want to ask yourself why you're mad at these people. And what we find out is that most cases, most of the time, it's because what they've done to you. And it's, by the way, it's not the person that you're really mad at, it's what they did. And that's what's making you mad. And then it goes even beyond that. It's not necessarily what they did, it's how it's affecting you. One of your basic instincts or more are being hurt or threatened by what this person did. Is it your self-esteem, the way you feel about yourself, that cost you money, your pocketbook? What about your ambitions, like your goals and dreams in life? If you feel like your parents weren't there for you to support you growing up, you might feel like you have low ambitions and because of them. What about your personal relationships, including sex, romantic relationships, are hurt or threatened? So when those things get hurt or threatened, we get upset, and so we're burned up, is what he says. So we make these columns he has for us here. What I like to do on page 65 is, he lists who he's resentful at. He talks about Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, his boss, and his wife, Lois. And then he explains why. And you just keep it real brief. He says, we're usually as definite as this example. And the cause, what did they do that's making you mad? And you write it down. So, Bill's mad at Mr. Brown because he's flirting with Lois, told Lois about it, he has a mistress. And this Brown guy might get his job at the office, so he's mad at him for that. And so on and so forth. You go down the row and you list these different, what they did. And then in the third column, you fill out what of your instincts are hurt or threatened by this resentment? And so he goes on and tells us, we went back through our lives. I'm at the bottom of page 65. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So you think it through and you write these things down, you get them on paper. And he tells us on page 66, usual outcome, he says, to conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. So prior to doing this work, usually you would just end it at that. That SOB did this to me. I don't like the guy. I'll never talk to him again. And that's the end of it. And you just continue to be mad. And the usual outcome is that people continue to wrong us and we stay mad. So that's no good. So here's the key. This is so important for us to know. Page 66, this first complete paragraph, talks about it's plain that this life with deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. So it's a waste of time, it's futility, and it's unhappy. You're walking around mad is no good. It says, to the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. So you could have been having a good day, all these days instead of walking around mad. And you're wasting your time by being angry, he's telling us. He says, and also with us, our maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience is what we're hoping for. He tells us this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found it is fatal. So not only are you wasting time, you're playing with your life. This is a life and death thing for you. Walking around mad can kill you. You're in this business of resentment. So we can't do it. And the reason is when we harbor these feelings, we're shutting ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. We're blocking God. And then we get so uncomfortable that we just say, F it, and we start drinking. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people relapse because of resentment. They get so mad, they just can't stand it anymore, and they say F it and start drinking. Bill tells us, number one offender. So here's the key. He tells us the solution too. We turn back to that list because it holds the key to our future. It says we were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. So we're going to shift our perspective and think of it differently now. And we're going to see that this wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, has the power to kill me. So I need to escape. How can we escape? I says, we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? So this is a must. It's not a suggestion. I have to figure out what to do with these resentments or I'm going to drink again and die. So he said, this was our course. He's going to give us the answer now. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Wow. Okay. So the people that hurt me or hurt themselves. The people that have harmed me have been harmed themselves and they're struggling and they need I need to cut them a little slack. So it says, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So it's a realization that, oh yeah, they are going through a lot, or they were in the middle of something. And I need to extend a little grace and mercy and forgiveness to them because that's what I hope for and expect when I do something wrong. And that's God forgives me and gives me grace and mercy. I should do that for this person too. And so it says we ask God. So we're going to pray. We're talking to our higher power to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And this is the first of the prayers, the 4-step prayers. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. So Bill tells us we avoid retaliation or argument. We're not in the get even with him. I can't stand this guy. How am I going to retaliate? We don't do that anymore. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. And then he tells us, even if you can't be helpful, which you can't to all people, at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. So we're going to look at these people with a little kinder and more tolerant view of what's happened and realize that they need a little bit of forgiveness and grace and mercy, not only for their benefit, but most importantly for mine, because if I don't get over this anger and resentment, I'm going to drink and die. So this is a top priority for me. And now, so that was those first three columns of the inventory. Now we're going to get to that fourth and fifth column. He's going to explain it to us. So we did on page 65, those three columns. Now we're going to refer to our list again. So you get that sheet of paper and you look at it and you put out of your mind the wrongs the other people had done. And we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. So now it's time to own up to your part in it. What did you do to kick things in gear here? You know, you had something to do with it. So the question is, you know, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. It says, though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. So now, when we saw our faults, we listed them. So we make a fourth column on our inventory there. And Cuzin, come on in and share.
No, I think that when you finish this paragraph, that'll be a great place to stop, and we'll pick up next week.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is time. We've begun to get a little relief from these resentments by looking at it from a different angle up above. And now when we fill out this fourth column and we list our faults and we acknowledge that we had our part in it, we may have started the whole thing in motion ourselves. We're certainly co-owner, if not the full owner of this incident. Then we put that down and we have to be honest about it. And then it says we admitted our wrongs honestly, and then we're willing to set these matters straight. So that's the fifth column. And we put down what the proper action is. What's the right attitude and right action compared to the fault that we listed in the fourth column. So that's how we complete the inventory. You know, we have the first three columns, who you're mad at, why, what happened, what's affected, real brief. And then in the fourth column, you put down what your part is. What did you do wrong? And in the fifth column, what should you have done and what are you going to do from now on, now that you're a recovered alcoholic? So yeah, that'd be a good place to stop and pick up next week. Thanks for that, Cuzin.
Okay, great. So let me see where we go from here. This has been great. So where we're stopping at is actually the first page of 4 inventories. This is the first of 4 inventories that will be explained to us in this chapter. So let me get this book back up. Do you have the end script up already, Clyde? Gotta find it.
I do.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Take us out.
Okay, I'll be happy to. So thank you everyone for coming to the Cuzin Jonathan and Clyde the Rocketman Big Book study. We meet every Sunday at 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern in this room. And this podcast will be available by this Friday. You can join us on Telegram for updates. So Big Book page 164. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order. But obviously, you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. So thanks again to my co-host and dear friend, Cousin Jonathan, and thank you for the rest of the group for being here. And we're going to close the meeting now with the Lord's Prayer. So if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to come on in and say the prayer with us. And I'm going to ask who brought us together for this great Big Book podcast today.
Our Father,
Our Father,
Who
who
God in
is
heaven,
in heaven,
be thy name,
holy be thy
holy is
name,
his name. His
thy
kingdom
kingdom
come,
come,
as it
his
is.
thy
will
be
be
done
done
Give us
on
this,
on
earth as it
earth
is in
as it is
heaven.
in
give
heaven.
us our trespass,
Give
Give
us
us
this
this day
day
our daily bread,
our
trespass,
and
daily
forgive us
bread,
our
and forgive us our
trespasses,
trespasses as we
and
forgive
we
those who
forgive those who
trespass against
trespass
us.
against us.
kingdom, the
And
Lead
lead us
us not
not
into
into
temptation,
temptation, but
but
deliver us
deliver us
from
from evil.
evil one.
For
For
thine is the
yours is the
kingdom,
kingdom,
the
and the
power,
power, and the
and the
glory
glory,
forever and ever.
forever and ever. Amen, amen,
Amen.
amen.
Hey everybody, please be sure to subscribe. Subscribe so you know when we drop new videos, new podcasts, and also please like the videos and share them. Share them, tell your friends about them, spread this great message that we at the Zuko are spreading. So subscribe, like, and share. It really helps. Thank you.